Yes, welcome back to the South Australian Sports Show. A very special guest in with us, Baz. He has had a stellar footy career as a player and as a coach, so we know what it's like trying to spare some time at this time of the year. Jade Rawlings, we talk about, new coach in Norwood. Hey Jade, thanks for coming in, mate.
No worries, Phil. Good to be here.
Yeah, mate, let's talk about your footy career, because we'll get to the coaching and to Norwood in a minute, mate. But, had some time, mate, with Hawthorn. 148 games is pretty good going if you can survive that long. So Hawthorn, Bulldogs, North Melbourne. Drafted straight out of Devonport. Let's talk about that. You're sitting at home, mate. The draft comes in. Find out you're going to Hawthorn. Were they the team you wanted to go to?
Yeah, I was a massive Hawthorn supporter growing up, one-eyed. Absolutely idolised the club and all its players. And then I was a bit of a cricketer footballer split growing up, and the draft wasn't really something I thought was ever going to be relevant to me. And then, I came home from school one day. Tassie didn't broadcast the draft back then, and I got a phone call from a local newspaper saying that I was the third Tasmanian drafted and Hawthorn's sixth pick, number 94 out of 95 overall. So I still remember it very clearly. It was all very surreal for me for probably 18 months. I don't think I adjusted to that it was where I belonged until early into midway through 1996.
Did the Hawks, did they speak to you? Did they say, hey mate, we're a chance to, was it all, because that happens a lot now, but did that happen back then, 94?
One conversation over the phone. I was not on the radar. Peter Knights, who was a great man, he coached at Devonport in the statewide league. So he had some contacts from my understanding that they'd kept in touch with, and they had a pick, the second last pick overall in the draft, and took a stab. I just turned 17, so I think I've been 17 for 3 weeks, so I was not physically, mentally or emotionally ready to go away, but best thing that could happen to me.
Other clubs?
No.
No one else? No one else spoke to you? So just...
Of all the clubs in the comp, the one that I followed was the one that took the risk on me.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is. I was at the back end of the good era. So flags in 83, 86, 88, 89, 91, and then most of those guys just started to come to the end. So, but I got to play with them and call them teammates, which was a real thrill.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant.
Mate, you touched on it, that you weren't ready to go at 17, and there's been a lot of talk around the AFL, and we'll come to your time in the coaching in the AFL, which was pretty fantastic as well. Does it need to be changed? Do they need to pump it up and give the kids another year or two? Do you reckon we're taking them too young into the AFL?
I don't. I think that with the detail that goes into recruitment these days, the readiness will be different for 17-year-olds who have gone to boarding school or are in regional areas. I find they adjust quicker because they've been involved in senior clubs, whether it be cricket or footy, where I find the kids in more TAC Cup, private school footy, haven't moved out of home, are less ready to come in. So I think it's really individually based, and I'd hate to be seeing young kids like Matty Rowell being held back from coming into the AFL last year and have the impact. So the clubs can be held back by not being able to pick players who can make them better. So I'm a fan of keeping that.
And the physical side of it, do you reckon physical? I mean, I know it varies again, it's different across the board from each individual, but...
That's the biggest thing. They can't deal with the game mentally until they can deal with it physically. And I'm sure young Ugle Hagen, that everyone wants to see a number one draft pick, but clearly Bulldogs aren't going to expose him to the rigours. Because I saw one young South Australian boy come to Melbourne and get exposed with the speed and the intensity of footy, and I reckon it affected his career real early in the piece because he played too early. Jack Watson was at Melbourne, played way too early. It haunted him for quite a while about being able to deal with the AFL. So the physical capacity to deal with it physically definitely affects them mentally.
All of these kids though, mate, footy's their life. Footy is, you can tell, that, right from under nines or whatever, that's all they want to do is play footy. They want to play AFL footy. So, I would have gone the other way. I would have thought mentally they'd be pretty ready to go because that's their dream. That's what they've been thinking about. Physically is the only thing I think of that maybe they're not.
It's a really interesting
quite
comment
there.
you make, because I find the mental love of the game isn't as prominent these days with young people who come into the AFL. The way you described it is the way I'll certainly mean my brother grew up. Absolute adulation for footy and loved it and were devoted to it, but you quickly learn that that's not the norm. That a lot of people fell into AFL because they was told they were good at it, or it was another sport they got into. They were in another sport and then fell into AFL, and then the demands of the game exposed them. So the mental side of the love of the game is probably one of the greatest challenges for players.
So are you calling me old here? Are you calling me out of touch?
I'm thinking, mate, in the first interview, I want to say this first interview, a fantastic assessment. That's right on the money, Jade. I'm saying right on it, mate.
I can see where you're coming from there.
It's interesting what you say, though, because I'm with you. You'd like to think that people come into the game, love it, and devoted, and so mentally they're ready. But the demands of the program, the scrutiny, the capacity to back up session to session to session. Social media is a genuine issue. If you haven't made it and you're a top draft pick, people letting you know. If you've got people got access to you, if you've got those platforms. So it's harder than people realise, and that's
yeah.
why the best always come out on top.
Yeah, and I suppose back in my day, it would have been easy we had one like Greg Anderson, for instance, who would have started really young when he was at Port Adelaide. These guys just walked straight into a SANFL side. The AFL is a bit different. The AFL is, like you say, that is just...
It's a massive beast, isn't it?
It's huge. Yeah. But the South Australian model years ago was really healthy. Like Jonathan Robin got drafted 3 years before he actually rocked up at Hawthorn. So he comes to Hawthorn as a 22-year-old with senior footy under his belt. So there's arguments for every case. And right now at Norwood, I believe we've got a good half a dozen players who at a mature age are ready to go into the AFL. Now it's up to whether other clubs see them as good enough, or if they're prepared to look at SANFL with the lens of being open-minded to what they can do rather than what they can't do.
Hey, mate, you're probably pretty well placed. You've spent some time at Richmond, you've spent some time at North Melbourne, spent some time at Brisbane, some time with the Doggies as a coach, assistant coach, and big roles in those places. Do the clubs differ much for you in the role that you played as you see it as an assistant coach?
Yeah, they do. Yeah. So when I first finished playing, I was 28 and lucky enough to get a role at Richmond under Terry Wallace. So I find whenever you do something for the first time, whoever you follow is what you think the way it should be done. So Terry was a pretty big role model for me, the way he went about coaching. And then I got the chance to coach Coburg in the VFL. Went to Brisbane, and Vossi's model up there was completely different to Terry's. And then came 2 years after that, came back to Melbourne, and Mark Neild was a first-year coach. So completely different model, the way of going about it, compared to then Paul Roos coming in, compared to Neil Craig, compared to Simon Goodwin. So there's been a lot of, and it's just all subtle things, as you'd know, with your career of clubs going, different organisations, what they value, what they put a premium on, and just the day-to-day norm of what goes on around a club. It just, I reckon 90% of clubs are similar, but it's the 10% which can, Do
you reckon as a coach, and you guys were touching on it before, that when we played, you played because you loved to play. That was a big part. That shifts. We've become more Americanised now, where it's how much is in it for me. We've become a bit more individual. Not totally, but we're not as team orientated, say, as we were 20 years ago. Do you find that with the players?
Yeah, and I don't judge them for it either, Phil.
No, nor do I.
Because I've got a different view. I'm like you, I'm a bit more traditional and all that, but they can get a lot of leverage out of what they're involved with, and they got every right to. And you've got one chance to cash in.
Good on them, I say.
But some of the motives of the why people play are significantly different to team player and win. It's All Australian, best and fairest, Brownlow, sponsorship, just general notoriety. So it takes all sorts to make a footy club most successful team.
Which gets back to your recruiting, doesn't it? It's the character you recruit. It's the guy, it's so important, because I don't think you can win a flag unless you've got 18 to 20 blokes team orientated. I don't think you can win an AFL flag if you've got 1 or 2 in there that are just, next year I'm thinking about going to Melbourne, or I'm thinking about going here or whatever. I don't think you can win a flag. I really don't. And I think that's why at the moment, one of the local sides here is a good chance, because I think they've got that 20 character, the good character in their club. But mate, I was going to ask you quickly here, before we move on, you mentioned a little while ago 28. 28 is very young to be stopping.
Yeah,
stopping play. AFL maybe not, but
injured.
But 28.
Yeah, I had really bad knees. My knee problems had I had the operation on 17, which was pretty minor, but I just suffered general posterior, and then it'll be a cartilage issue, and then a medial ligament ripped off the bone. So it was just always ongoing. Then I just got to 26 and I wasn't able to train the same way, and then so I got to 28.
And that hurts.
I had 1 more year in contract, but I was starting to embarrass myself as a player, I think. But I couldn't train, and you guys both know, and you've chosen sports, if you can't train, it's harder to perform. And but the best decision I made was to accept my fate and then move into a coaching career, which is I was lucky
and
enough
you're still doing it, mate.
Still doing it.
That's
love
the
it.
thing. You've been in footy since the time that you stopped playing, and I had a look at your record this morning, that you've stayed in footy.
Yeah, and I got sacked at the end of 2020, and that's the first time that's happened to me. And I think if you're going to have a career for that long, you're going to
done pretty well, mate.
You've going to have all those, everything happen to you, the good and the bad. But I've been that fortunate. People here, and like you said, you read, I had 26 years of an AFL career. I don't think you can complain having those opportunities. And I love what I do, so it's what's brought me to South Australia.
And 11 games with Richmond as the caretaker coach. I find that, I reckon that's brilliant. Yeah. But how much pressure were you under there?
It's interesting you asked that, because it was one of the best things that ever happened to me in professional life. 11 games gives you a chance to really impose a way of going about it, with environment, with behaviour, with method of training and playing. but also it's a bit of a free hit because I don't think I was ever a genuine chance of getting it. I was in the final four with the interviewing, but I don't think I wouldn't have been the right choice because I wasn't ready. I wasn't clear enough with how I want to go about it. I didn't understand the business of footy. I didn't know myself well enough. So I would have been a shocking choice. And the bloke they did choose has been one of Richmond's greatest ever coaches in Damien Hardwick. Yeah. So, but as an experience, brilliant. Outstanding. Yeah, it's 12, 13 years ago now, so it's, it does seem a long time ago, but I've got great memories about it.
You know, as you move through the clubs, it's interesting because Richmond's supporter base is just massive. It's just a human machine moving forward with the volume. You know, then you're at Brisbane and North Melbourne, so Brisbane's kind of smaller. It's almost off to the side, isn't it? North Melbourne, not that dissimilar. Yep. You know, did you find that the pressure at Richmond was much greater?
Oh, yeah.
Not in the as coaches we're always about winning, but the expectation from outside is massive.
As a club, our office, we could look out over the car park and you'd see media assembling. So something had got out, something was happening, and you just always knew if they got it right, it was going to be something that was going to be unstoppable, which is the way Brendan Gale and Peggy O'Neill have forecast it. But one of the proud things for me, I had 8 years at Melbourne Footy Club, and we were not respected and uncompetitive when I first got there, and then to be part of a final in 2018 where there was 85, 90,000 people at the G against Geelong, that was a big deal to see the growth in a club. So the Brisbane started to decline when I was up there, which I'd like to think it wasn't the reason because I was up there, but you can't help but think that way.
What Melbourne needed really at that time that you talk about was a win. That's what they needed. Had they won that final series, had a couple of wins in there, I think we'd see a different Melbourne now.
Well, it was interesting, because they won the first one against Geelong, which is a big deal. Beat Hawthorn, don't think we played that well, but then went to West Coast and got an absolute smacking.
That was the one.
And that derailed the group because we came back the following year and weren't able to perform at the level. Expectations rose, fitness levels and maybe mindset changed.
So a different side, had they won that though, had they beat West Coast there, Melbourne would be a different club today. That's what I think.
It's interesting though, it's the margin, isn't it? So if you look at Port Adelaide when they lost in the grand final, Geelong by that big margin, it took them years to recover. We've seen the Crows 3 years ago get the big whack by Richmond and then they've dropped out of it. Same thing happened to Melbourne. So the mental part's the hardest part to attack, isn't it?
If you go back to Richmond when they just started playing finals, that final against Port Adelaide over here, it was done in 15 minutes. The whole
game's
kick
over.
into the wind saga with Koch, but it can be quite damaging mentally.
That's a myth, the win.
Seriously,
I'm serious about that. Port players laughed at that when the commentators kept saying he's kicked into the breeze. There was no way he kicked into the breeze. The breeze actually was going, when they were out warming up, was directly across the ground. So there was really no breeze either end. If you had a look at the second quarter of that game, I think Port kicked another 6 or 7 into the breeze. They didn't go in the breeze.
No, it wasn't the breeze.
But it was a bad toss. It was a bad day for.
They weren't ready.
Well, it was a bad day for my friend Troy. Bad day for Troy.
Bad day for Troy. I don't reckon it was that bad. I think you got misread in that. Anyway, we'll move on from that because I'm going to stick up for Troy and you're not going to. Hey, mate, let's talk about Norwood. What brought you to Norwood?
I lost my job at North Melbourne October 2020. I was probably not expecting that to happen given I was in contract, but from there, I was considering what the other options would be, going through other AFL clubs. Given COVID, most of the clubs were cutting back and not adding. So, but at that time, I spoke to James Fantasia and he said that they were in the market for a new coach. And as soon as that was mentioned, it caught my attention. Some of my best years, or my favourite years, have been when I've been the coach at the second tier level. So, and I was well aware of Norwood's history and strength within the competition, as you would know. So that was alluring for me, and then went through a genuine process which I really enjoyed. I felt challenged and haven't regretted it one bit. Since I moved to Adelaide in November, I feel like this is where I was meant to be. I love my job, I love the city, met so many great people already, and we've only played one practice match, so I feel I've got to earn a lot of trust with Norwood people that I'm here for the right reasons. I'm invested. That's what they would expect of their coach, so time will tell that.
Hey man, I reckon I heard an interview from you just after you got appointed and you were in Melbourne. I reckon you were out playing golf. And this is the beauty of experience. You know, a young guy gets a point, he goes, I'll be there tomorrow. He said, well, look, I've got to pack up the family. I'm playing golf. I've got a couple of things on. I'll be there in about 3 weeks. And I thought, I like this guy. He's pretty calm. He's not in a rush, which is, you know, again, as you get older, you hear stuff and you go, this guy knows what's going on. You know, I haven't hit the panic button going, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm organised. I'm just arrived and ready to go.
Golf calms you down. Golf.
The period of time. So I lived in Melbourne for most part of my adult life. We were in the hubs last year, so I was in Queensland.
Horrible.
I've got family who live in Tassie, so I got a what do you call G2G pass exemption to get into Tasmania through COVID. So that's when I lost my job. Then I found out about opportunity in South Australia. So there was a travel bubble between Tassie and South Australia, which I was able to maximise. But I haven't been back to Melbourne since June last year.
Yep.
So I've had to pack up a house. Yeah, not actually return home to pack up. So it's been a very odd 6 to 8 months.
About quickly, the trial game last weekend, you played the Crows. Pretty happy with what you saw in your first hit out?
Yeah, I was. Just because we were able to expose a way of training over 4 months in a game and in a really genuine, intense contest. Adelaide had some good players out there, and they'll be pretty strong in our SANFL this year. And a lot of our players that played under 18 premiership last year for Norwood were able to give exposure for the first time at senior level. So we learned a lot about some of our personnel. We learnt that our style is one that's going to stack up against good, tough teams, and but heaps of learning to go. That's probably the other part that I'm pleased about, that we got a fair bit right. There's a heap that's a bit out of whack, and we've got a couple of weeks to get it right.
Mate, you mentioned before all the coaches that you've been under in your own time as coaching. We steal little bits from all of them, and then there's a part of us that becomes it. For you coming in, what were the 2 things you thought coming in that I'm going to stamp myself on straight away?
I'm really big on behaviour and standards. I want to create an environment where people want to be there. They feel they can be the best version of themselves, but they also understand what's accepted and what's not. That's my big ticket items when I go into new footy clubs. As you would know, you've got to learn a lot about where the power bases are and the influences within a footy club. But the thing, Phil, for me that made it much easier was 100% implicit support from the board. So, it wasn't ideal, probably how it got to me being in the job, but that happens in sport. But they've given me a real good charter to be able to go after the things I need to go after. And I'm very clear on what the game played and how I want to train it and how I want to educate it. So the challenge is bringing all your people around you along with that way of going about it, and be able to trust them that they can do it at the level that you need it.
Yeah, assembled a pretty good panel too, mate. Coaching panel. I see Troy Clements is back at the club. I think he'd be a 100-game player. He's a good player.
100-game player, premiership player. So he's come from Emmanuel College. He's a fireman. He's got a great work ethic. He's really passionate. 2 guys who've been at the club for a while, with Steve Carr and James Sowell in our midfield. Rob Harding, who's been involved in the AFL for the last 10 years.
Senior assistant?
Yes, he's been at Essendon and Adelaide in particular. So he's doing a role which is basically footy operations manager, and also he's going to coach our reserves. So he's still got that. It is a big role. I think it's a bit bigger than what he might have realised initially. But I've building relationships with the staff. We don't know each other that well, but developing it. I generally find it takes 12 months before you're really starting to flow and understand each other, how you operate, but trying to fast track it as much as we can.
You're with a good club, mate. You're with one of the traditional clubs in SA. You're one of the big, strong traditional clubs in SA, in Norwood. They've been a long-time rival of Port Adelaide, my team and whatever. And they're a good footy club, so you've done really well there, mate.
Thank you. I love the passion for the competition over here. I love the people's passion for their club and how deep-seated it is. So, I've got a lot of respect for the club.
Look forward to you coming down to Alberton.
I'm sure we'll be welcome.
Hey, Jade, really appreciate your time, mate. Know you're under the pump, first year in. Stay with us. Still plenty to come on the show.